You can see it's been dropping over time pretty consistently. It's even lower now than it was at the end of that graph. But you can see that even though it has this downward trend in the early 60s or the late 60s and early 70s, in 1973, from 1973 to 74, that's when the speed limit change kicks in. And it does seem like there's sort of this discrete jump that's even below the downward trend line in terms of a reduction in traffic fatality rates there. Then in 1987, the states were given the option of raising the speed limit. It turns out 40 states, so 40 out of 50 states adopted these higher limits. 7 states did not, and then actually 4 states had no affected roadways. So Alaska, or yeah, that's Alaska, isn't it? Yeah. So Alaska, District of Columbia, Delaware, and Hawaii did not have any rural interstate highways. So basically, you had sort of 47 states that could have changed their speed limits. 40 of them increased them, and then 7 of them just kept them the same. So they estimate the effect of speed limits on fatalities. They estimate this differences model, where the control group is the ones that didn't change their speed limits, and the treated group is the ones that increased them to 65 miles an hour. Ideally, you would like these speed limit increases to be randomly assigned, but that's definitely not the case. So what you have here is a map of the states that increased speed limits versus those that didn't. And so the gray states, both the light gray and the dark gray states, are ones that chose to increase the limit to 65 miles an hour. Basically, the difference between the gray shading is that the light gray states are ones that authors have data available on, and then the dark gray states are ones that they don't have data available on. So those are going to be the treated states, in particular, in terms of the actual sample that they can use in the data. It's going to be the light gray states. Then the white states are the ones that don't change their speed limits. So you can see there's very strong geographical clustering here, right? Basically, the only states that don't change their speed limits are these northeastern states. So places like Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and then Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. So you could think that those states are not going to really have the same traffic fatality rates probably as all of the rest of the United States. And they might even have differential fatality trends. So we're going to do the differences and differences, but you still might be concerned that the northeastern states might just have sort of a different trend in fatalities relative to all the other states, so South, Midwestern, Western, and so forth states. And if that's true, if there are those differential trends in fatalities, then the differences design is still going to give you bias differences. So what they do is they estimate these triple differences of designs that I mentioned, where they're basically looking for a subgroup in the treated states that's not subject to the treatment. And there's actually a couple of subgroups that were not affected by this increase in, or the speed limit increase. So one untreated subgroup would be the urban interstates. Remember I said that you're allowed to increase speed limits on rural interstates, but not urban interstates. So there's a group that even in the treated states is not going to see any impact from the speed limit increase. And so if there aren't differential trends between the two sets of states, then hopefully the fatality rates for urban interstates should evolve similarly to in both the treated and the control states. So they estimate two separate effects. They estimate first the rural effect, so this is the effect of the speed limit increase on the rural interstate highways, and then the urban effect, which is the effect of the speed limit increase on the urban interstate highways. So I put effect in quotes there because we don't actually expect to see any effect, right? We know that there was no policy change on those highways, so if the research design is valid, you shouldn't estimate a statistically significant change in fatalities there. There's also a second group that is basically that is untreated in the treated states, and those would be rural arterial roads. So not all highways are interstate highways. Certainly, when you look at 2-lane undivided highways, those are definitely not interstate highways because they're not up to the interstate standard. But even here, you look in the Bay Area, so certainly 880 is an interstate highway, 80 is an interstate highway, Highway 24 is a state highway, so even though it's an 8-lane divided highway, it's not an interstate. And 101 down the peninsula also, technically it's a federal highway, but it's not part of the interstate system. So those are actually, I think it was formerly a federal highway, but effectively it's a state highway now. So those are sort of examples of highways that even though they sort of look like interstate highways, are not part of the interstate system. So you can look at rural highways that aren't part of the interstate system, and there again, even in states where they're increasing the speed limit to 65 on the rural interstates, the speed limit on those rural arterial roads, those rural arterial highways, stays fixed at 55 miles an hour. So what they find is that raising speed limit does increase fatality rates. The average fatality increase on the rural interstates, as I said before, at the very beginning, turns out to be 36%. The t-statistic on that is 4, so the standard error is going to be about 9 because the coefficient, or the t-statistic is equal to a coefficient divided by standard error. And then they have these two sort of falsification tests. So if they estimate the same model but look at the fatality rate on urban interstates, what they find is a negative 6% effect that's not statistically significant. So this is sort of encouraging in terms of the validity of the research design. You wouldn't expect to find any effect here if the states were on parallel trends, similar trends, and you don't find an effect, or at least not a statistically significant one. So that's good news. The average effect on fatality rates for rural arterial roads, so this is another unaffected group, is positive 8%. It is at the margin of statistical significance, which is the rule of thumb for being significant is whether or not the t-stat is greater than 2 in absolute value, and it is right at that margin. So ideally they would probably like this coefficient to be a little bit smaller and not statistically significant. That being said, at least it's still the case that in magnitude it's much smaller than that 36% effect that they estimated on the rural interstate. So basically I would interpret this as there's evidence there might be some very modest bias in their research design, but it still looks like, even if you sort of wanted to factor out that bias, it still looks like they have a pretty large, or they would estimate a pretty large effect of the speed limits on the fatality rates for the rural interstates. Okay, so that's kind of the cost side, right? So the take-home message is when you increase the speed limit from 55 to 65 miles an hour, you're going to see an increase in speed limits, increase in fatalities that's about 36%. And then on the benefit side, they have to look at the travel time reductions that accrue from raising the speed limits. So they basically do that same distance analysis, but now the left-hand side variable, the outcome that they're interested in is travel time, which is really just the inverse of speed, rather than the fatality rate. So what they estimate is that the average effect on travel time for rural interstates is about a negative 4% effect, so 4% reduction in travel time. Now that people can drive faster, it's highly significant with a t-stat of 6. The average effect on travel time on urban interstates is basically 1% not statistically significant. So this is consistent with what we hope because they didn't actually change the speed limits on those urban interstates in any of the states. And then if they look at those rural arterial roads, which also didn't have speed limits changed, they estimate 0% effect on travel time. So again, that's. So then when we want to think about the value of statistical life, how people are actually trading off risk and benefits here, basically what you're finding is that you have a 36% increase in fatality rates that's being exchanged for a 4% reduction in travel times. So we go back to the VSL formulas that we gave at the beginning. So we're looking at basically the marginal willingness to accept here, because you're sort of thinking about a case where you're moving from a lower risk regime to a higher risk regime. So we need to sort of pay you or give you some benefit to accept that. So we're going to look at the marginal willingness to accept for the risk increase, and then rescale it, divided by the amount of the risk increase. So it turns out if you kind of total all of this up over all of the traffic fatalities and all of the millions of miles or billions, actually trillions of miles, I guess, about 2 to 3 trillion miles of vehicle travel in the U.S. every year. It all adds up to 497 million hours of time savings, so that's on the benefit side, and then that's being exchanged for 5,187 extra fatalities. when you do that ratio, you're going to get an answer. But of course, the dollar value is going to depend on how people value their time. So what the authors had to do is basically assume that people value their time at the wage rate. Whether or not that, like the average wage rate of the state, whether or not that's actually accurate, I think is somewhat debatable, but it's going to at least be in like the approximate ballpark. So the average wage rate in the states they were looking at that time was like $12.30 an hour. So it works out to $6.1 billion benefits for 5,187 extra fatalities, which implies the DSL is 1.2 million. They have a variety of sort of like, they do some different like tweaks to their regression specifications and stuff, and so they get somewhat different answers. But in general, they sort of get this range from about $1 million to $1.5 million per life state. Okay. So that's kind of that's like the take-home message from the paper. Now, whether or not we want to like accept that as an unbiased estimate of the DSL, I think sort of depends on several issues. So the first issue could just be whether or not you believe their fatality, their estimates of the effect of raising speed limits on fatality risks. I think they make a pretty convincing case, especially when you kind of see that there was there wasn't any difference between the two groups of states when you're looking at like the urban interstates and the rural arterials. So even if it's not exactly right, I think it's kind of their estimate is going to be in the right ballpark, at least for that era. I think a bigger issue is whether or not the lawmakers actually believe that the fatality risks were this high, right? So getting back to what I was saying at the beginning of the lecture, what we would like to know is actually like what's going on inside the consumer's mind, or in this case, what's going on inside the legislators' minds, because they're the ones who are actually like pulling the trigger on raising speed limits. And so what we would really like to know is how much they thought fatalities were going to increase and travel times were going to change when they increased the speed limits. And in particular, if they sort of believe that, so they believe, say, that fatalities would increase by like 15%, and instead they increased by 36%. Since we're imputing or we're assigning that 36% change in fatalities to their action, we're going to end up basically underestimating the DSL, because they would be thinking like, oh, there's going to be sort of 2,000 lives lost when we do this, but in actuality there were like 5,200 lives lost, right? So when they were making the decision, they could have put on a higher price per life and thought that it was, that it made sense to go ahead with it. But then in retrospect, if we told them like, actually, here's the number of lives lost, it was like, whatever, say 2.5 times more than you thought. In that case, they might sort of reconsider their decision and say, oh, well, using the DSL that I like to apply, they would literally use that language, but implicitly, I would not want to have passed the law that way. So, personally, for me, like when I first saw that number, the fatality increase is probably higher than I would have expected. You're getting only a 4% change in speeds, and yet you're seeing fatalities increase by almost 10 times that amount. And it's not clear to me how the lawmakers would have known the risks prior to the study. So we're assuming the lawmakers are informed and know what the change in fatalities was going to be. But if they are, like, if it's sort of common knowledge what the relationship between speed limits and fatalities is, then it's not clear why the authors need to estimate that, like they do in the paper, right? So they argue that lawmakers were sort of informed regarding the risks, and that many studies prior to their study had generated similar estimates. But then you say, okay, well, why do you need to generate new estimates then if you're telling us that that this was already common knowledge? In particular, when you actually go and look at some of the studies they reference, I wouldn't really interpret them as having provided similar estimates. So there was like a National Research Council sort of summary that estimated that the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit had saved about 3,000 to 5,000 lives per year. Ashenfelter and Greenstone find 1,000 lives lost per year by increasing the speed limit. So I said that there were like 5,200 or like 5,187 lives lost per year or something. That was over a period of about 5 years in their sample, I think. So they're finding about 1,000 lives lost per year. But the thing is that they're only looking at increasing the speed limit for less than 50% of the states, because remember, there are a lot of states where they were just missing data. So it's like less than half the states. And furthermore, on highways, they're only accounting for like 1 in 7 interstate or rural arterial fatalities. So the NRC study is talking about basically the effect of 55-mile-an-hour speed limit on all states, on all of the highways on which it's being applied. And Ashenfelter or Greenstone are really only looking at the effects of increasing the speed limits on like less than half the states for only sort of 1 in every 7 miles of highway. And so you could think that if you wanted to sort of scale up their estimates, total lives lost, to like all states for all miles of highway, you probably have to multiply by something like 14, like double for the number of states they actually use the study, and then multiply by like 7 or something, because they're only looking at a small subset of total highway mileage. In that case, then, this 1,000 becomes like 14,000 lives lost per year, which is considerably larger than 3,000 to 5,000. So I think you could easily make a case that the lawmakers probably didn't expect this large a fatality response when they estimated their, when they passed their legislation. And if that's the case, if the lawmakers underestimated the fatality risks, then the Ashenfelter and Greenstone figures are going to underestimate the VSL. So remember, VSL is mean willingness to pay or accept for the risk increase divided by the amount of the risk increase. The lawmakers are trading off the time savings and the perceived risk increase from raising speed limits. What we're saying here is that Ashenfelter and Greenstone basically overestimate the perceived risk increase, and if that's true, they're going to underestimate the VSL, right? Because basically the denominator in that VSL calculation is going to be too large relative to sort of what the lawmakers really believed when they were making their when they were passing the law, and so the denominator is too large. That's going to make the VSL too small. The thing that I find kind of interesting, so let me just sort of say this at one point, and then we'll call it a day and talk about the cancer cluster study on Wednesday. But the thing that's interesting is you actually go through the math. It turns out that the lawmakers are trading off something like about 50 to 60,000 years of travel time saving for something like 207,000 or so years of life lost. So we've been talking about like the value of physical life, which is sort of like an average life being taken. But it turns out like the average person who dies in a car crash is something like about just under 40, maybe 39 or something like that. And the average person lives until mid-70s, almost 80. And so you could think of sort of about 40 light years lost per accident. So if you kind of add up all the light years lost per accident and then compare that to the time savings, it turns out that the total light years lost are greater than the time savings, right? So that sort of calls into question whether or not this would be a rational policy, right? Because it's one thing to talk about sort of putting a dollar value on time, which is what we do to get the VSL, and then you're kind of, once you're sort of you're comparing like time versus dollars, not apples to apples comparison. But here's literally to say like, time in terms of travel time savings versus time in terms of light years lost, and it doesn't really seem to pencil out in the sense that you're ending up losing more light years than you are gaining in terms of travel time savings. So the only way that sort of if you thought people were risk averse, then this definitely wouldn't make sense of the trade-off. You'd have to basically have people be risk loving in order for this to make sense of the trade. Okay, so that's it for today, and we will talk about cancer cluster study on Wednesday.